1 Samuel 16:7 and John 7:24. Okay. You've got two times that God is saying, I don't judge by appearances, and neither should you. That's interesting. Okay. Because if we don't judge by appearances, or if Jesus is telling people in the first century, and these are put this in quotation marks, the Jews. In the Gospel of John, that phrase, the Jews, is a reference to his opponents. It's not just the nation of Israel, just Jewish people. But the phrase, the Jews, in the Gospel of John is Jesus' Jewish opponents. Okay? And Jesus is saying to his opponents, those who have rejected him, he expects them to judge righteously and not by appearance. Well, what's that going to do to the doctrine of total depravity? That seems to put a crack in it, at least, in my opinion.
One quick question. So appearance is the physical appearance. It's not the appearance of behaviors that they're acting the right way, but that's not who they really are. That's not what it's referring to.
No, I think it's a both and. In other words, it connects them together. But what I want to do is using 1 Samuel 16:7. I would like to say that the appearance of the person. How are we fighting with appearances today? My point here is when someone says, I want you to look at me and recognize, my color, the color of my skin, your proper response, in my opinion, is I can't do that because that would be unlike God. I'm trying to follow God, and God doesn't judge by appearances, so neither should I. As Martin Luther King says, I'm going to judge you by the character, that you have rather than the color of your skin. So if you're an antagonist, if you can't get along with people, if you're a liar, a cheater, whatever, that's going to determine, how we relate to each other.
Are you guys familiar with the Arroyo Hotel, Cafe in Austin? It's the one that puts up all the funny sayings. They've written the books about them.
No,
I saw one the other day that fits this perfectly. It said, "Tacos are like people. The good stuff's on the inside."
I like it.
That's the Texas version of that particular verse, I think.
That's right. That's perfect. Okay, just a couple of principles, a couple of insights on the fact that he's going to reign in righteousness and peace. He'll not judge by appearances. Verses 4 and 5, he will not delay the execution of his judgment. You think we should apply that today? We got people who are in prison way too long. They should have had a quick trial. And, if they kill someone, murder someone, they should be executed. Okay. He will not delay the execution of his judgment. That's not a death penalty here, guys. That just means whatever was right, he's going to do that quickly when he's reigning upon the earth. That's why you're not going to have a systematic systematic corruption. It's not going to be developed during his reign. You can have people who sin and they will be judged. They will be dealt with. Okay. But you're not going to have systematic corruption because he's not going to allow that to happen. He's going to execute his judgment quickly. Also, look at verses 6 to 9. You might want to check this out. This is one of the reasons that there is no kingdom today. No kingdom today. Why? Well, tell me if you see this happening. The wolf will dwell with the lamb. I had a professor, and you know who I'm going to be talking about. He said, "Oh, that's happening today." Only thing is that the lamb is inside the wolf as they dwell together. But This is the wolf will dwell with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the kid, the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little boy will lead them. Also the cow and the bear will graze. Their young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. And the nursing child will play by the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child will put his hand on the viper's den. They will not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. That's what nature is going to be like when Jesus is ruling. You don't see that today because Jesus isn't ruling. He's not king today. Okay? He's going to be king one day. But today, what is he doing?
He's sitting at the right hand of God in heaven, watching.
Not just watching, but you're right.
He's interjecting for us.
He's our high priest. He's interceding for us. Okay? And some of us are wearing him out. Okay? Just say it. 1 John chapter 2, verses 1 and 2 says, he's my advocate. I have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous. So if you can think of him sitting next to the Father, and then I sin, he stands up and defends me. He sits back down. I sin again, he stands up and defends me. Some of us are wearing him out. Okay? And remember, Satan is accusing us day and night before the throne. That's Revelation chapter 12, verse 10. Okay? So, in this day, all the nations will worship and follow the Messiah. It sounds a little bit like universalism, doesn't it? Well, remember, who gets into the kingdom? Only the righteous. There are no wicked. There are not even any stumbling blocks. So you're going to have righteous people living righteously. So yeah, it sounds like universalism because it is.
Dale, I find it interesting. It talks about righteous versus the wicked, and not a believer versus the unbeliever.
Yeah, or the saved versus the lost. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, more often we hear the believer versus the unbeliever versus the saved versus the lost. That's not what it says.
Yeah. That's why when you even talk about the believer, you need to kind of use the air quotes, the believer and the unbeliever. Why? Because you don't really have those two categories in Scripture as distinct individual people. Okay? You've got a person, he's either believing or he's not believing at a given moment. So he can be both. Depends upon, what choice he's making. Who is he dependent upon? If he's depending upon the Lord, at that moment, he's a believer. If he's not depending upon the Lord, he's still a believer, but the object of his faith is the wrong object. It's either himself, or it's an expert, or it's someone else in the world. Okay? But remember, God made us dependent beings. It is impossible not to live by faith.
So Dale,
it's impossible.
In Genesis 20, would you call Abimelech a believer?
In Genesis 20, Abimelech, absolutely.
He was fearful of God. I mean, he was scared to death. He's terrified.
Well, he called God Adonai, my master.
So who was the righteous and the unrighteous in that scenario in Abraham and Abimelech?
Well, Abraham was the unrighteous and Abimelech was the righteous. And by the way, if you have a New American Standard, look at verse 4 and look at your margin. Okay? In verse 4, it says, Abimelech and his nation were blameless. And then in the margin, what do you see? Literally, that word means righteous. Well, if it literally means righteous, why didn't you put that in the text? Well, that may give the wrong impression.
Yeah, my version says, God says you're innocent. It doesn't say righteous, but righteous would be, I think, a better term.
Yeah, it is. It is the word dikaios, okay, which is the word for righteous. That's the word that's been in the Septuagint was translating the Hebrew word. We're looking at righteous, exactly the same word that is used from cover to cover in the New Testament.
If I may, I have a question. I thought I was confused, and now I'm sure. If only the righteous can get into the kingdom, how do you know if you're righteous enough?
Well, go back and look at Matthew 5:20. It says, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you won't get in. So not only do you have to be righteous, but there is an amount that is not disclosed to us. In Matthew 25, you've got the 10 virgins. None of them are in sin, but 5 get into the kingdom and 5 don't. The point is, if you're pointed in the right direction and you keep walking in the right direction, following Jesus, trusting in him, you don't have anything to worry about. The problem is we're not living that kind of life. We want to be off and on. We don't want to just follow him. We don't want to do the right thing. We want to do the right thing when it's convenient, when it's beneficial. He says that's probably not going to get you in. We're not talking about perfection now, guys. Nobody needs to be perfect. So, you're constantly been taught that you need Christ's righteousness so you can be perfectly righteous to stand before God. Okay. You hear it for the 900th time today. That's BS. Okay. And that doesn't stand for Bible study. Okay. That's BS. It never says that in scripture. It just says, guess what? I've got to be righteous. And so what is a righteous person? Well, if Abimelech could be righteous and he had not have the scriptures at all, you know what? It must not be that difficult. And again, not everybody has the same amount of revelation. To whom much is given, much is required. To whom less is given, less is required. You know what I think is the best answer to this, Jim? What's your heart telling you? You see, it's the Spirit of God's job to convict me when I'm out of line, when I'm not doing the right thing. So if the Spirit of God is convicting me saying, you know what? Maybe something's wrong here. You better straighten that up. You better, get on your knees and find out, Lord, what is it that I need to adjust here? Because that's the Spirit of God's job. That's not the individual's job. Remember John 16, verses 7 to 11? It says the Spirit of God, when he comes, he's going to convict the world of sin, righteousness, and judgment. Sin, because they don't believe in me. Now, back in the day, I took that to be your initial faith in Jesus. No, that's not what he's saying. He's saying the Spirit of God is going to convict you whether or not you're following Jesus. You're believing him on a daily basis.
What was that reference again in John?
John 16, verses 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. 7 is important because the Spirit of God is going to come to the apostles. But in verses 8, 9, 10, and 11, he's going to convict the world of these 3 things. So how does that work out? Well, Jesus was commissioning them to go to the world to preach a message. And so when you hear the message, Jesus is going to expect you to respond to that message.
Dale, I got a question. It's what I hear you saying. What I think maybe is my mindset about this is that we all have different standards. You said to whom is revealed the most is expected. So I know where Jim's coming from. We're all looking for safe harbor. give me the minimum list I can meet and get in. It's not in there. And,
yeah, that's right.
And chances are it's different for each one of us. And it has
Right.
to do with the way he has made us, viewed us, revealed things to us, how bad we've misjudged things. It's just got to be this complex thing that's probably beyond our ability to understand.
Yeah. Remember too, there is no, as you're saying, I think very well, Gary, there's no set passage that says you got to do these things to get in the kingdom. Remember the parable of the soils? The good soil, you got 100-fold, 60-fold, 30-fold. So here's our good people, and this guy right here is only given a third of what this guy is doing, and God says, "That's good. That's good enough." The point is, this isn't about you keeping some kind of record of how well you're doing. This is about the Spirit of God saying, Taliaferro, you're not really treating this person right. You need to shape that up.
It seems to me, when we, and this is the way I sort of look at it, and maybe I'm rationalizing because I live by rationalization. We love God. We're to love God and do what's right. That's our motto. That's written across our forehead. That's what we should be doing. The reason we do right is not because we have to do right. It's because we love God. So we respond to God through love, doing what's right. If we're doing what's right because of the rules, that doesn't count. If we're doing what's right because we love God, that's what counts.
Yeah.
That may be oversimplification.
Remember, what you're quoting, by the way, it goes from Genesis 20 all the way to into the New Testament. It's the same message. You got those two things: love God, love your neighbor, or love God and do what's right, or fear God and love your neighbor. It can be said different ways, but you got two things. Okay, and the point is, if I'm loving God, okay. John 14:21 says, how do I love God? He who has my commandments and keeps them. That's the man that's loving me. And so the bottom line is the Spirit of God's job is to tell me, you know what? You're not in line with the word here. Get shaped up. Does that mean that if I don't get shaped up in an area that I'm not going to make it? No, it doesn't mean that. Okay. How do you know it doesn't mean that? Look at Judas. Judas never got shaped up in the area of his thievery. He was a thief. He never improved on that. He kept taking money out of the money box. And then he betrayed Jesus. Guess what? He's still going to be at the head table. He's still going to be ruling over one of the tribes of Israel. So we're not looking at perfection here, guys. We're looking at someone who's following Jesus. And even if you fall, what's the book of Proverbs say? If you fall 6 times, yea, 7, get up and keep moving forward. It's the person that falls and then starts looking for another path because, this one looks a little hard. That's the person that's not going to make it. He's actually going to be a stumbling block to other people. He's the person that's looking on the outward appearance to make his judgment rather than the heart.
Hey, I would just throw out 1 John 3:7. It says, the one who practices righteousness is righteous.
Yep.
Doesn't say you have to be perfect.
Yeah, that's one of the things that our traditional theology has messed us up, our minds up, because they threw in that, the Christ righteousness is perfect. Yes, it is, and guess what? You get to tap into that periodically whenever you trust him for that life, because his life is a completely righteous life. Okay. The question is, can you be righteous apart from Christ?
If righteous is practical, it's something that you do and you practice, then yes, you can.
Now, there's only a practical righteousness in the scripture, guys. There is no forensic righteousness. There's no righteousness before the throne of God kind of thing, like we're taught. Okay. There's only a practical righteousness. So, I apologize. We start talking like this, and I have a thought, and then it leaves, and it comes in, and so I'm all over the place, and I know it. Jim, I don't know if I've helped or hurt, or the bottom line is, how do you know? God should be telling you. God should be, if you just respond, and if God is not saying anything, you're in a good place. That would be my answer. What is it? That's my answer, and I'm sticking to it. So
yes. Say, Dale, what if I could go back for just 1 second? What was the quote on Jesus as my advocate in John? What was that verse?
1 John chapter 2, verses 1 and 2.
Thank you.
Connect that to Hebrews 7:25, and then connect that to Revelation chapter 12, verse 10, I think. Okay. Verse 10 says Satan is accusing the brethren day and night.
In Hebrews what?
7:25.
7:25.
That's where it says that Jesus is my high priest praying for me day and night. Okay.
Thank you.
Praying for me that he might save me to the uttermost. So salvation is what? Saving us from the sins, because he's praying for me. Okay.
So for me, Skip has his way of looking at sort of things and about rationalization. On this particular point, when I find myself asking I wonder if that's good enough, the answer is, if I'm asking, it's not.
Well, let me. What I would say is, if I'm asking, that's a good thing. But if I'm rejecting the conviction of the Spirit of God, then it's not enough. But guys,
yeah, that's what I meant.
This is not. God does not mean us to convict ourselves. That's the Spirit of God's job. And if you're not being convicted, take it for granted that you're righteous. You're in a good place. Okay, there's no necessity from God to browbeat yourself. Okay, and don't worry. I mean, if you're like me, gee whiz, not a day goes by that I'm not very clear that I've just screwed up somewhere. Okay, he convicts me. I want to confess it immediately. It's cleansed. And I'm ready to go again. Look at chapter 11, verses 11 to 16. When he's ruling, actually right before he starts ruling, he's going to regather Israel. Remember, Isaiah is talking to the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and they're both going to be exiled. And so when this kingdom starts, when the Messiah comes to rule, he's going to regather Israel. There won't be any lost tribes at that point. Okay, verse 11. This is the physical return of Israel to the land. By the way, the land should be called the land of Israel. Do not call the land Palestine. Okay. I have a few books, even from the first seminary that I went to, that just wasn't careful. And they talk about the land of Palestine. There's no such land. Palestine has never been a country, never been a nation, ever in the history of the world. You've got Palestinians, that's people who are living on a part of the land, but that land has never been recognized as their nation. Okay, it's the land of Israel. Go back and look at Genesis chapter 15, verses 18 to 21. Mark that down, because that's the land that God gave to Israel. And think in your mind, It goes from on the east, from the river Euphrates, all the way down, not to the sea, but below the sea down to the river Nile, the river of Egypt. That whole part is Israel's land. Do you not see why they're trying to wipe out Israel? Because Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon, they're all on Israel's land. So they want to wipe out Israel so they can have their land. That's just like the parable that Jesus gave about the vineyard. When he sent, servants to get the produce from the vine workers, and they kill the first two. He said, well, surely they'll listen to my son. He sends his son. They kill the son. Why? Because they reason, hey, if we kill the heir, then we can have it ourselves. That's what's going on, guys, in the Middle East. If we can wipe out Israel, then we're going to have the right to the land. Okay.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. If you look at Jeremiah 31, verses 34 to 37, God says, Israel will never cease from being a nation before me. As long as there's a moon and a sun and the stars in the sky, Israel will be a nation before me. Even if
Joshua?
That's Jeremiah. Jeremiah, chapter 31, verses 34 to 37. Okay. Israel is going nowhere. Remember, you've got the Abrahamic covenant, which is the land covenant. They were given a land. They're going to get the entire land one day. They were given a covenant with a king. This is the king that we're talking about right here in Isaiah chapter 11. He's coming to rule, and he'll rule not by the external appearance, but truly in righteousness and peace. And then there's the kind of people he's going to rule over. That's Jeremiah 31, verses 27 to 34. It says they're going to be a new covenant, people who have a new heart. Okay? That's the people that he's going to rule over. So you and I get to participate in that covenant, though it wasn't made for us. It wasn't given to us. As Romans chapter 11 tells us, we get to participate in some of the covenants. Okay? Not because we own the land or that Jesus is coming for our, kingdom. No, he's going to come to set up Israel's kingdom and to rule over the rest of the world. Well, while he's ruling over the rest of the world, we'll be there, and he'll be our king as well. So we participate in that covenant that he made with David in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 12 to 16. Okay, so Israel will be regathered. It says in verse 12, and he will lift up a standard for the nations, and will assemble the banished ones of Israel, and will gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. What's that sound like? That ought to sound like Jesus' prophecy in Matthew chapter 24. I think it's verses 30 and 31, where right before, when he returns, before he starts ruling, he's going to regather Israel, those that are still living, back to the land. And he's going to regather them for the four corners of the earth. Wherever they've been scattered, they're coming back. Okay? So the regathered Israel will finally be unified. Verse 13. And the interesting thing is, it's going to be like Egypt. Remember when Israel left Egypt? They left with Egyptian possessions, gold, silver, all kinds. That's what's going to happen here. Israel will obtain their enemies' possessions. Verse 14. Egypt and Assyria especially will give up the Jews in them. And Assyria and Egypt will be utterly destroyed. And there's going to be a special highway from Assyria back to Israel for them to return home. Now, chapter 12 is just kind of like a climax, really, of chapter 11. So we're going to have worship in the Messiah's kingdom, verses 1 to 6. It's going to be a time of thanksgiving. Now, the reason that you should focus on this is look at verse 2. Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid, for the Lord God is my strength and song, and he has become my salvation. Notice it in verse 2 here. Salvation is meant as a deliverance by God of his people from the hand of all those who hate them. So as he regathers them, he's delivering them from all the nations around them. So salvation is a military term here, being delivered from the hand of all who hate them. Okay, 12:2. Verse 6, the Holy One, Messiah, will be in Israel's midst, ruling. He's ruling because of chapter 11. He's going to be in their midst now. So verse 6 says, cry aloud and shout for joy, O inhabitants of Zion. For great in your midst is the Holy One of Israel. Messiah is called the Holy One of Israel. Zion is a reference either for part of the city of Jerusalem, all of the city of Jerusalem, or for the nation itself. Okay, most likely here it's referring to Jerusalem, the capital city for the nation. So Zionists, all Zionism is saying is Israel's going to get the land that God has promised them. And the capital of that land is Jerusalem. They will have all of it, not part of it. It won't be divided. They will have it all. And guys, that's it. That leads us into chapter 13. We only have 10 minutes left. You want to try, I'm afraid to get started on that. Let me just tell you what you would have gotten, and you can read this. Isaiah 13 and 14 are the chapters that are used to describe the fall of Satan, especially chapter 14. Okay? That's what pretty much is traditionally taught in many conservative seminaries. Okay, this is the fall of Satan. I had the good fortune, the privilege to have Dr. Zook as my Old Testament prophet, and we had to have 3 papers, and I tried to pick out the hardest papers I could think of, the controversial passages, because I wanted to know. This is one of them that I picked out, and my study led me to believe that no, Satan's nowhere to be found here. We're talking about the king of Babylon. Okay, we're not talking about Satan. So when you get to if you look at your outline, when you get to chapter 14, I'm going to make the argument that this is a human being. It's not an angelic being that's fallen here. Okay? So, see, we did all that in just 3 minutes, and we didn't have to walk through the whole thing. So study that before we get back together. And let me look at my calendar here so that you guys can. September the 12th. Let's do September the 12th. Is that okay with everybody? Okay. A lot of times the earlier date is, you got school starting and you got a lot of people coming back from vacation. You just got a lot of stuff going on. Another week kind of frees everybody up and we can get in a pattern. So we'll start back at September the 12th.